Stop. Now you're the porn star. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you both?
Hello, ladies. Oh, I should be wearing a bath towel.
God, this is actually just excruciating.
Ah, that's the best part.
Hi and hello, Arcanauts, and welcome back to the Badger Den, where we're going to continue our discussion on all things Arcanaut. I'm here with James Thompson, the irresponsible Black Badger, and the equally irresponsible founder of the brand, Anders Brandt. How are you today, Anders?
I'm good, Robnod.
And Jens Tomps?
You just missed him.
So what a lot of the Arcanauts may not realize is that we all have pseudonyms within the industry, whether we like it or not. We have Andrea Brandt, Rob Nudd, and Jens Thompson for some reason. Yeah. Your father-in-law once called your wife, right, and asked
how Jens spells his name for a Christmas card.
For this guy.
And my wife said James, to which he replies, well, that's a weird way to spell Jens.
He's not wrong. It is a weird way to spell Jens, yeah. But entirely the correct way to spell James. So, James, thank you for inviting us to your workshop once again, or at least allowing us through the door when we gate crashed your party. What's it like working here every day?
It's got its ups and downs, I think. I absolutely love when I get to this phase, in this room specifically, it's more the post-production of material. So it's usually been quite a lot of work into figuring out what we're going to use for dials, for example. Mm-hmm. By the time it gets in here, it's more fabricating the goofy idea that's maybe become reality and actually making a physical prototype that we can all three of us look at and say, yes, this works, or no, this looks ridiculous, or this is possibly going to kill a lot of people. But when we get into this phase, it's usually things are a little more stable. Mm-hmm. The crazy stuff is happening out the other side of the wall here when it's more the mixing of things and the materials development and climbing in and out of the reactor all the time and such.
So talking about the stuff that happens outside of this particular part of your workshop, the developmental phase, how easy or impossible is it to put a cost on that in terms of materials and labor, and where is most of the brand's money spent at that portion of development?
Most of the money goes to Anders' crippling gambling debts. But you know what? That contrast, I think, is one of the things actually that really makes Arcanaut work. Because looking around, like, you're not seeing piles of diamonds and gold bricks and all this kind of stuff. We're using quite industrial materials, but I think the way that we're using them in what I think is kind of a novel and exciting way, you're imparting value onto something that isn't just an expensive material. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good sort of brand ethos to have, because there's this sort of theory that you could take any crappy watch and just glue a bunch of diamonds to it, and now it's suddenly worth more. But that's the diamonds doing the work. That's nothing to do with you. So if we can make somebody fall in love with steel, plastic, rubber, whatever, it works for architecture. Why doesn't it work for watches?
Well, I think that this holistic approach that you're taking to the design and marketing of Arcanaut watches is certainly proving that it does work for watches as well. But now we're in this burgeoning era of sustainability, as it were, and a great many brands, rightly or wrongly, are placing that front and center of their communication strategy. Do you think that it would be fair, or maybe a disservice to the materials that you use, to refer to them as upcycled?
Good God, that's a podcast episode right there, Rob. Yes and no. I'm really going to wobble back and forth on this one. Pardon me. Fordite, for example, I could say, yes, it's an upscale material. Excuse me, because it was an industrial waste product that we found a new home for. In a higher end of the market and such, great. But we're not actually solving it. We're not taking a waste product and removing it from the environment. If we were smart, we would figure out a way to paint cars that didn't create Fordite, which would be crappy for us, but to be honest, it would be better for the world and for the environment. So we're recycling, but in a very self-serving way. Mm-hmm. So that's why I've always really tried to shy away from that question, because somebody that's more educated on the matter would completely cut me to shreds over
And
it.
also because you don't save the world by making, watches. That's
No?
Oh
well,
dear.
well,
You specifically...
But no, let's look at it differently. I mean, we're not talking about recycling; we're talking about upcycling. So you're taking a product that otherwise would be waste, and then you're reassigning it as a jewelry item. So like that would otherwise be in landfill, but now it's on your wrist. So is that not environmentally?
but you shouldn't use it as like I'm very much against the using that sort of thing as a marketing ploy, because it I would say upcycling would be if you figured out a way to take food waste, like massive amounts of food waste, and then getting fuel out of it.
Okay.
It's not, I think it's greenwashing to say, okay, we're taking, just some bits of car paint and then and that's upcycling. That's just a marketing ploy.
Do you really believe that? Because I'm not sure that I agree with that by definition. I mean, I see what you're saying, that we should always stay well clear of greenwashing and not do what many brands are doing and placing it in the middle of our communication strategy. But people are going to look at this and they're going to want to categorize it somehow. Like, what is it that we're doing? We're taking things like you've worked with aeronautical materials before in the past that really couldn't be reapplied to aeronautics. They would otherwise just be unused. And it's the repurposing of those materials, not by definition upcycling. Whether or not
I think it depends on your motives. Like I think what you're referring to is I have small amounts of carbon fiber plate that were production scrap from like the stealth bomber or whatever the hell it was, something like that. I don't know if I could really call that upcycling, because I'm relying on the cachet that this material has. This isn't just carbon fiber. This is stealth program.
But it is scrap.
It is scrap.
And
It
it
is
would
scrap
other-
that would have otherwise been tossed out. So, yeah, okay, I'll give you heart marks for that one.
Yeah, you see, the thing is, I'm certainly not saying that we should start telling everybody that we're like super green company that's upcycling all this stuff to save the planet. I think that's just, it's a very small scale. But can it really be argued that the dials in many cases are not upcycled? I mean, dark matter is made from a fountain.
What's the... They know. That's admissible evidence. I'm trying to think, what's the sort of parallel version of upcycling? Because we're taking material out of a supply chain, scrap material, say from this airplane, and we're not making it greener. We're just giving it another purpose. So it's more like kind of parallel cycling.
If you didn't use that material that was otherwise just scrap to make that dial, the dial would be made of something else, which itself would have an environmental impact. So if you had like 30 dials made in China in a big factory that's pumping out oil into a reservoir of oil,
1,000% correct.
So by using those materials instead of outsourcing them to an extremely ungreen facility, then I mean it's not that you're reducing. You're removing a carbon
Ocean
footprint.
plastics. There's many companies. Not traditional. What's what I'm looking for? It's very, very common right now to be using recycled ocean nets, ocean plastics, very uncalled, and doing cases and all that kind of stuff out of it. But what you need to take into account, maybe they were dragged out of the ocean 100 feet from your studio. That's very local. And then you take that material and you send it off to a CNC factory in Singapore, and they mill it, and then they send it back to you. So suddenly you've taken a very good idea, very clean, very sustainable little idea, and the process in which you did it, you're no different from everybody else.
Well, that's kind of the
And that's
perfect
kind of a
example.
cynical way of looking at
But
it.
that's greenwashing, isn't it? I mean, that's the perfect
absolutely
example
greenwashing,
of it.
yeah.
But there's nothing like that going on here, and we certainly haven't made environmental responsibility a key tenet of the brand. It's just interesting when people have talked to me about it and they go, oh, so it's like upcycling, because that's a key word in their minds, in the mind of consumers. Isn't a word in our minds that we're thinking about. But when you actually break it down, that is kind of what we're doing.
It is. I think if we're talking about the Fordite dials, I would call that upcycling. I think actually I would, now that I think about it. And I think not just for the physical reason, I think more for the story, for the not the story, for the dialogue that it creates. And if you can take one little tiny piece of garbage out of the system and you put it inside your watch and you wear that watch for the rest of your life, you've given another life to this chunk of material. And this little material now becomes a bit of an ambassador for all the other junk. So you're creating a little bit of awareness. You're sort of championing something that is throwaway.
But the interesting thing is, perhaps the most ironic thing about this whole process is how expensive Fordite is to buy, despite the fact it's a waste.
It's horrible. It's because it's become it's been very popular as a details craft material since probably the 60s or the 70s. Now you see lots of people using it like beautiful handmade kitchen knives and all this kind of stuff. It's a very, very trendy material. In its definition, they're not making any more. Traditional Fordite with a capital F was made in a relatively small window, the 70s to the 90s in American car factories. Some of the stuff that I get access to, if I'm trying to find really razzle-dazzle colors, sometimes you'll get something that's like, oh, this was actually made by Chrysler, or this was made at a Jeep factory in the late 90s. So it's not really the same era. It's not really the same thing. But you can sort of take it either way on that. So it's not Fordite by definition, maybe. I see Fordite as a blanket term for all this stuff.
Yeah.
But there are some real purists. Like I have a small piece of Corvette Fordite that someone gave me. That's like the most collectible stuff. Car people go bonkers for Corvette Fordite. I didn't realize Corvettes were manufactured by Ford.
Right. So
what's the
purest definition is any Fordite that was manufactured in a Ford factory itself.
Yeah, but I don't personally have any connection to Ford. I don't.
But it is a catch-all term, I think, that's accepted.
Yeah,
along
it's
with
absolutely. It's like
most of
Kleenex.
the-
It's a catch-all term for kind of everything.
So you mentioned that they don't really make it anymore. Why is that? What happened in the late 90s?
Basically, the process got a lot cleaner, both from an environmental process and just financially. They didn't waste as much paint. I mean, they used to be the original Fords in early part of the century. The entire body was mounted on rails, and they would go along the rails, and the whole car would get dipped in a giant swimming pool full of paint, and all this shit would drip off all over the place. Hey, it's messy making cars, right? And then, when it got to be the 40s and the 50s, everything got a little more streamlined. Obviously, the sort of military production phase really taught America how to make things cleaner, faster, better. So there was less waste, but you had this process of, if you're painting cars, all the different components go through a system. And all these individual pieces would be mounted on like moving jigs, and it would go through this semi-automated process of the primer, the paint, the clear coat, and then it goes through an oven, which bakes the paint and finishes it. So the door might only go through the system once, but the mounting rig that the door is on, after 500, after 1,000 cars have gone through, that jig is just, it looks like a wedding cake. It's just got buttloads of this stuff. It's a technical term, pardon me. Sorry, Mom. Piles of this stuff baked onto it. And they started to realize that this is just wasted material. So when you get up to the more modern times, you don't waste as much paint. I've been in the paint bays at McLaren, and I kid you not, it was cleaner than my kitchen. I actually had this naive idea that, like, can't we make McLaren Fordite? I was talking to the guy that was responsible for the paint shop, and he's like, no. He's like, that's the dumbest idea ever. He's like, you know how much our paint costs? We don't waste a drop of it. So there is none.
And the paints have changed, right? The paints have also changed.
The paints had absolutely changed. I might actually have some behind me here somewhere. But the McLaren Fordite that we tried to play with didn't work at all, because modern, very high-end car paint is water-based. So the reason Fordite worked so well is because it's so full of solvents, and it was so chemical-based, and once it's gone through the oven all these times, it is a absolutely solid inert plastic. The McLaren stuff is water-based. That makes it more environmentally friendly, not as many toxic chemicals and all these things in it, and it also stays a bit soft. So if a little rock hits your $300,000 car on the road, the paint actually moves and flexes it and sort of absorbs it a bit. So that's great for your car, but it sucks for Jimmy T, because I can't use that stuff for anything. It's just like trying to sand like chewing gum. It just doesn't work.
That means that there are different qualities of Fordite, oftentimes based on the era in which the Fordite was made. But tell me about some other Fordites that we see in the watch market, because Arcanaut is not the only brand to purportedly offer Fordite dials. Arcanaut offers genuine Fordite dials, but we have seen some other Fordite dials marketed as such from other brands that shall remain nameless. I'm sure people can find them if they're interested in looking for them on the internet. Could you tell us what exactly is wrong with this other kind of Fordite, and why people shouldn't be too keen to wear that on their wrist?
It'll explode and burn your house down.
Oh wow. Okay.
Guaranteed.
Yeah.
No, this is always a bit of a delicate thing because the actual material doesn't matter. Fordite is Fordite. It's just dried car paint. There's different categories of it. Usually those categories are depending on if it's full of junk. If the person had a great big, furry beard, you sand through the layers and you're just finding bits of crap in there all the time. That obviously is less than desirable. Sometimes if you get something that is, like I'm thinking of, we're here in Gothenburg, Sweden, the home of Volvo. Can you imagine how boring Volvo Fordite would be? It's like it would just be an inch thick block of gray. Wow, fun. So finding colors, finding good quality, tight sort of compression of it, but you also need that balance. You need it to be a little bonkers, because if it's just dead flat, that's where we get our linear Fordite from. It's where something is maybe set, say, on the side of a workbench, and it starts to kind of drip when it's wet. And then all those drips then harden, and then something drips on that, and you get this kind of oak tree bark look to it. That's where you get the goofy stuff that we're wearing. And there's no bloody way you can ever replicate that, because that is just a natural deposit. It's like how an icicle forms. It's like how moss grows on a tree. You can't control that as much as you want. So people can buy different kinds of Fordite, and it is the real stuff. But a lot of the responsibility that I have is kind of finding the nice piece within that. And it's really easy to get a little too poetic with it, but almost like working with raw gemstones. Somebody that knows these things will pick up the stone and look at it, and they know exactly where they need to cut it to get the optimal sort of piece out of it. So after, I don't know how many years of experience now, day to day with this stuff, I'm getting a little better at looking at the cross-section of a piece, and then you look at the top features and all these, and you start to figure out kind of what's happening on the inside.
So can you because you said to me in the past that you're actually not a talented sketcher at all. You don't really draw with a pen very often. You tend to draw in material.
Thanks for bringing that up.
I apologize. But I mean it as a compliment, because I wonder whether the way that you look at the Fordite enables you to almost see through it somehow. I mean, that's how you sort of describe the way you interact with material normally. You look at it, you see the object in the material, and then you cut it from it. So when you see a lump of Fordite, do you kind of instinctively now know, oh, there could be a good bit here?
Yeah. And I hope that doesn't sound too kind of self-grandiosing, but at this point, yeah. Because you know when, like for instance, I had a piece where the jig that it was sitting on must have had a bit of an exposed screw head sticking up.
Right.
So the piece on the bottom had this perfect casting of a screw head in it, and you could actually track that form upwards through about 1.5 centimeters of material.
Crazy.
So at the bottom, it was a perfect cross, and when it got up to the top, it had now moved about 2 inches over to the side, and it just made this really bizarre circle with a cross in the middle of its shape. And actually, I remember the dial that we made from that, because it looked like some kind of weird. It looked like the monsters from Stranger Things with those
Was that
weird
Darth
kind of
Tusk.
No, it was
That
the
model.
the hooded.
Oh God, it had a really rude name, right?
Yeah. The hooded
Demogorgon.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's one. The hooded demigorg, and that all came from the bottom of the material was just a complete perfect cast of the screw head. But because it was all wet things dripping and depositing and doing its own thing, it made this really neat organic abstract form of it. And I think maybe somebody that just buys a flat piece and cuts a piece out and there's your Fordite, you can get lucky, absolutely. But if I can brag, the kind of stuff that we're doing, you need to know what you're looking for a little bit, and you also need to know how to bend the rules.
Well, you have bent those rules quite some way, to the point where, I mean, the Fordite watches made by Arcanaut are divisive. Of course, they are not for everybody because they're quite extreme, visually very engaging. But a lot of people would like to know exactly what it looks like in real life and on the wrist. And that leads us on to another question that has been sent in from one of our followers, Time.Texas. Thank you for the questions. Anders, how important is it to brands like Arcanaut, small independents starting out that have generally a web-only presence, generally only B2C, to have physical representation in stores in what has been, for the last few years at least, a very digitally driven age?
I think it's super important because, first of all, there's credibility to you actually being in a store or having a physical presence, whether that is being in a store or if it's being at fairs, etc. But it's also a thing that you need to remember that some people, the minority, will buy watches just on a picture online. That's mainly the people that we speak to right now, because we speak into they like the brand and then they like the watches. They will buy it instantly. But the majority of watch buyers wants to see the watch on the wrist. Now, going from actually just selling online to selling to retailers is hard, because the margins that most independents and micro brands work at, that's almost an impossibility. Unless you find a retailer that really believes in you, believes that, in a few years you'll get to a scale where you can get, proper margins. So it is a difficult thing. And also going on fairs is not free, That's also a very costly thing, both in terms of, traveling, but also actually being on the fair and paying to be on the fair. So it is a super important thing. It's a super important thing, I think, for any independent, and to move into physical presence. And also, as we talk about in the past, the post-Kickstarter, the post-AI phase, everything now, because of AI, is going to be fake online. So people will want real things even more. They want physical experiences. So I think that's super important that we work ourselves into that over the years, but it is a hard thing because of the margins.
Can I, if I could build on something you said there? Early we talked about post-Instagram phase, if we're sort of hopefully getting into that. Post-AI, as you're saying, people don't really believe things at all anymore because AI has made it so nicely. Here's what's interesting. We're also in a post-Baselworld phase. So what the hell's next? There's not the big mega show that you go to and the entire industry comes together like Disney World. And a lot of what killed Baselworld was social media going nuts, saying, well, why is, pick a brand, why is Breitling going to spend 10 million euros to come to Baselworld and build that big booth when they can just show their stuff directly to their clients on, say, Instagram? Baselworld crapped its pants. Instagram, you can hear it crapping its pants right now. What's next? And if it's going back to physical retail, are we terrified of that, or do we welcome that? I don't know if we really know.
I think there's two things. There's both, in terms of, if you can't do physical presence, then one of the things that we are trying to move into, both in terms of what we're doing right now and with the things that we're planning, is to move into video, because video is the closest thing you can get to actually the physical presence of actually showing people how does the watch actually look like, what is the process behind the watch, what are the things that you're trying to sell, as you would on a fair, when you're standing and talking to a person. So video, moving to YouTube, I think is a super important thing for us, at least, to move into, and also think about and work towards retailers and getting the right partnerships, which we have, by the way. But it is retailers that really believe in us and are okay with not getting the usual margins that they would get. And not even that, but getting very, very low margins on the things that they sell for us.
Yeah, of course, there are ways that we can sweeten the deals in terms of like what kind of risk they're willing to take versus what kind of exposure we believe that they can offer us. But I absolutely believe that retail is important. And as you said right off the top, it's a qualifying factor. It's luxury by osmosis, as I always say. If you're in a window next to Omega or next to even Hamilton or Longines or something, people equate you to those brands. It's why brand sales reps are so militant about where the watches sit in the window. Who do they want to be seen next to? What is it that they are positioned alongside? I mean, it was a constant war when I was doing the same thing for Nomos to try and get put somewhere that elevated the brand rather than elevated the brands around Nomos. You have to think about it that way.
That's a super interesting point. If Arcanaut is sitting in a window, are we having our status raised because we're in the same window as Omega, whatever, or are we the eye candy? And there's a bunch of turds around us that we're sort of bringing up.
So there's really difficult. One of the things that people don't think about when you identify potential retail targets is whether or not the retailer is likely not just to want to take you, but whether they'll be able to take you. So, for example, if you only decided to target Rolex retailers, which I know a lot of brands have done in the past, because they're obviously very credible. If you go to a retailer, let's just take, I went to a retailer in Norwich, for example, Rolex retailer.
Shout out Norwich.
Shout out to Norwich, yeah, to my family. And I went in and I said, would you like to stock this brand that I'm representing in the window? And they said, oh, yes, you know what? We know the brand. We like the brand. It's very interesting. We might have maybe 1 foot or 2 feet of space that we could offer you in the window. And I said, great. I can drop a sample collection into you immediately on consignment for the first few weeks. And then if you like it, you can buy it. These are the margins, these are the terms, these are the payment deals, blah, blah, blah. And they said, oh, wait. We just have to call Rolex. And I was like, you have to call Rolex? And they said, we have to call Rolex because when we tell them that we're going to give you 2 feet of space in the window, Rolex might prefer to have that 2 feet of space for themselves. And if we're lucky, they might send us a Batman display. I said, a display? What about a watch? And they were like, no. But they might send the display.
So that looks like you've had one.
So it looks like you've had one that you sold. Yeah, or that you may be able to order one in the future. So lo and behold, they rang Rolex. Rolex said, no, you can't give that space to them. We'll take it. Here's a display. And if you're lucky, we'll send you a watch in 6 months.
Oh, this is the stupidest industry ever. This is just the dumbest thing ever.
But it was a real factor. But to go back to what you said about Baselworld losing the plot, obviously we have Watches and Wonders now.
Absolutely.
Which is the more direct successor to SIHH, but it's taken Basel's place as the sort of de facto major fair of the year. And then we have Geneva Watch Days, which is a very accessible fair, a fair that you guys have attended as well, alone before I was working with you, to meet and greet and show people the products and to get some direct feedback from other people in the industry. And I think that those fairs are very important for experience, to gain that experience, but when it comes to getting in front of customers, nothing beats being in physical retailers. And because a lot of the major brands are now verticalizing and pulling out of old, especially family-owned retailers all around the world and establishing their own boutiques or working with major chains that have the capacity to offer them shop-in-shops, real build-outs inside. So it's almost like, take the Ernest Jones on St. Anne's Square in Manchester, for example. You walk into the store and one half of it is like Omega. You go through an arch and you're in an Omega boutique. It's nothing but an Omega boutique. Omega branding, the cream walls, cream floors, the little gold Omega signs on the wall, big red Omega signs, separate counter, separate till, separate stock. It's part of Ernest Jones. It's not just a shop-in-shop as in like, oh, there's a nice branded counter or a build-out in the corner. It is a full shop-in-shop.
It's like an Omega embassy.
Right, exactly.
This is Omega ground. Your passport doesn't count here. Yeah.
And you have some occasions when you've got basically something like an Ernest Jones, which is part of a big chain, with 2 or 3 of these shop-in-shop concepts built out entirely, taking up huge parts of the store and effectively being verticalized. Now, what that means is all of the old school, like family retailers, the mom and pop stores that used to be the lifeblood of the established industry are now becoming the champions of the independents. So for guys like us, it's a great opportunity to approach stores that are losing more established brands wholesale, and it's happening all around the world right now at an alarming rate, and say, hey, do you want to stay in the business or are you going to exit? Because that's often the only option they have. If they have like 5 or 6 accounts, they lose 4 or 5 and they're gone, you know.
That sounds like a Bill Cosby impression. This is really exciting and really motivating because if you can go to these mom and pop shops, they're probably kind of pissed off that Hamilton or Omega, no offense to them, but, sort of have dropped them and gone for these bigger ones. So if you can say, you're known in the community as being a quality watch retailer. Do you want to take a chance on these goofballs from Scandinavia?
Yep.
That is probably a much easier sell than trying to get our watches into like Nordstrom's or any of these sort of big, massive kind of...
Yeah.
And I would rather do it at that store where they're more likely to be part of it.
Well,
mom and pop store.
A brand like Arcanaut needs ambassadors to tell the story. It's not something that, it's great to see it in the window. It's great to see it next to these major established brands and other independents, if that's what we're left with as an option. But you don't just go in and buy it willy-nilly. okay, some people do. 'Cause
It
some
does.
people are
It does
loaded,
need
but
some explaining because they are, as you said, they are a rather polarizing piece.
the Fordite especially.
And yeah, but I mean, I've heard people comment, or I've heard people comment on Instagram. Good English, James. I've read some comments where someone looks at one of the 4-die dials and they're like, "That's amazing! How the hell did you paint that?"
Interesting.
We're like, "Well, no." And then once you explain what it is, their mind explodes. So I can imagine I worked in retail for years and years and years. You need somebody that is as excited about these as we are to sell them. Otherwise, it's going to be, boy, that's a lot of money for a watch with a guy that painted a funny picture on it.
The thing is, you're absolutely right, and I know that it works because it worked on me. Because when I first saw Fordite, I wasn't particularly taken by it myself. I was like, what is this? It's like, oh man, can you even read the time? Jesus.
You're so fired.
The answer is, it doesn't matter because you don't buy Arcanaut Fordite for the time. You buy it for the times that it encapsulates and that you spend with it. But I bought one. So I know it works.
Yeah.
I know it actually works, and I know that if you have the right ambassador in store, and throughout my time with Nomos, I met so many great people who I would just love to have sell Arcanaut. It would be such a joy for them to flog the pieces to the willing to learn public. And if we had those kind of ambassadors around the world, and we don't want too many retailers, just a handful in key locations, but if we had them, goodness knows what would happen to the potential sales. And that leads on to another question, and that is, what are the growth plans and also capacity of Arcanaut in the future? So let's say we do expand into a couple more retail markets that we haven't yet cracked, like the Middle East or Australia, which are on the cards but not yet signed, sealed, delivered. What exactly do you think our ceiling is in terms of annual production, and how much has this guy got to do with it?
I would say,
Getting nervous.
I've always said, that when I can't write a personal letter to everybody that buys an Arcanaut, then we are making too many and selling too many. Of course, if it's bought at a retailer, I hope that the retailer does that. But I think it's
Love that.
right now we could be making 150 watches a year.
Yep.
With the current model we have, which are the targets that we have right now. In a couple of years, if we actually had the right facilities to do it, then we would be at maybe 300 watches, 300 to 500 watches. And I also think the market for something like Arcanaut is big enough for that. Then the question becomes, do you want to sell 500 watches a year? Do you want to sell 1,000 watches a year? Like, even if we could, would we do that? And it's a good question, because do we want a small, strong community like we usually talk about? Or do we want a massive amount of people that just likes you, doesn't love you? And I think for the longevity of things, you need to limit yourselves a bit, especially in the beginning of the brand. And in the watch industry, we are still in the beginning. We are still, Arcanaut is in its infancy. We haven't even, learned to walk yet. It takes, decades to actually get into the...
You can edit this part out. Sorry,
to
buddy.
even become a
Microphone fell
teenager, in the industry. So it is, I think, in a few years, we'll probably get to 300, 500 watches, and then we're going to stay there for a good amount of years.
But it's strange that I haven't mentioned MB&F in the last 10 minutes. This is something, shout out, this is something that Max has always said, that we don't want to be a company that sells 500 watches a year, because then it becomes something that's out of your hands.
Yeah.
You're relying on, it's all the supply chains and all the money. When it's a smaller production number, it's you talking to the client. That's a beautiful experience, not just ka-ching, 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 pounding things out in a automated factory somewhere. So that was the first time I'd actually heard? First time I'd heard. My English is falling apart. It's the first time I'd heard somebody actually say, I don't want to sell more than this many watches a year, because our community, our family, our tribe, as they call it, has come together in such a beautiful way that if we now sell 5,000 watches a year, it'll be just like, You can buy them at the gas station.
A bunch of guys who don't know as well.
Bunch of guys you don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Talking about that and production capacities, obviously one of the key selling points, I think, of Arcanaut is the amount of work that is done here in Scandinavia. Now, obviously, the cases and the hands are made in Denmark. The dials are made right here. The movements currently are Swiss, but they come to Denmark for their assembly and final quality control. And also the buckles as well now come from Switzerland, I believe. So we're expanding like the quality of all of the components across the board. But if you were to step up to 500 pieces a year and like hold that for the next 10, maybe once you've reached that point, would that be an issue sourcing Scandinavian, or would that make life a lot easier?
I would say we definitely need to restructure. We could easily, with some parts, make 500 pieces in Scandinavia tomorrow.
Like the case and the hands?
Like the case and the hands, we could do that, and it would be, be good. It's more the scaling of the finishing.
Yeah, okay.
So, for example, on the case sides, it's still Claus, like our watchmaker, who finishes the watches and polishes the sides of the watches.
Yeah.
That's a very labor-intensive thing.
In his little workshop in Copenhagen.
Yeah.
And basically, when we get to 500 watches, then he would not be doing anything else than doing that. So then we would need to train somebody to actually do that and polish the sides. We are actually working into that, but it is more the finishing of things that's the hard thing.
So people maybe don't know that the cases are hand finished. I mean, that's a really key point. I mean, it's not all done by machine. Like, it is literally done by watchmakers in Copenhagen. So you're saying to increase that capacity, the first thing you'd have to do is not necessarily a component issue, but a staffing issue. You'd have to increase the watchmaking department.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that'd be cool.
And also, when you need to sell 500 watches, it becomes difficult to manage, just the customer interactions. Right now, we can manage
emails and the hand holding and the crazy.
Right now, we can manage it because, like, we can, sell to somebody. We can write back and forth with them if they have questions. But as soon as you get into 500 people a year, that's a lot of people, like each month, each day that you need to interact with. Of course, like retailers will take some of that off, your shoulders, which is a good thing, but there will still be, a lot of interaction.
But the point of an Arcanaut is people want you. People want a handwritten letter from Anders. People want to know that, I bought an Arcanaut. Oh, did you get to talk to Anders? Yeah, that guy's great. That's part of the appeal of a micro brand, of an indie brand, whatever we call ourselves, as compared to buying a giant. I couldn't tell you who's the head of design for brand X out there somewhere, but when it's a brand our size, I know who made that. 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 And that's kind of it's like a family restaurant. You want to know sort of what's going into it.
It's the charm of buying, from an independent, that you can actually talk to the person that made the stuff that you're wearing.
Yeah. And I couldn't survive at a 500 watch a year. That's a ridiculous amount of work.
If it's 500 fortnite pieces, then it's got to be difficult. But
yeah, I mean, some people can knock them out real easy because you buy a flat piece and you cut out a circle and looks great. But more, it's the way that we're doing them, like trying to find all these crazy patterns and sort of chase certain colors, hoping where it's going to go and stuff. Like, I shoot myself in the foot here. I could make a fortnite dial in about an hour. The ones that we're wearing, this one took me 4 days. 4 days of sweating and swearing and throwing tools around, hand sanding under a microscope, just trying to, because there was this little bit of blue that just started to show up in the corner. And I was already at the right thickness, so I couldn't screw it up. And just chasing that little, it's going to be so good.
Crazy.
Days of work.
Do you think you could teach somebody to actually do it? Like, if you had a apprentice?
Yeah, absolutely could. I could teach somebody to do everything that I do.
What's the job?
Most depressing conversation I've ever had.
I am entirely replaceable.
I'm only here through AI, so.
Talking of replacing things, is there any scope and desire long term to not just upgrade the movement, as I think a lot of our followers know we're intending on doing in the relatively near future, but to actually go the whole hog and produce a movement, or at least a large portion of it, in Scandinavia also?
I think like the first step of that is to do, we might as well say we are working on a proprietary movement.
Yep.
With a company in Switzerland, and one of the reasons why we're doing that is not just to put that inside a watch and then that being it's to have some knowledge transfer. It is to figure out how could we do some of the things ourselves in the future. So it might start out with some parts being manufactured in Denmark, because the manufacturers that we work with could, in theory, produce the things for a movement.
So, for example, the bridges or a top plate or something to begin with.
Exactly. But then you get into assembly of the movement, right? Because then you need watchmakers on staff that can actually sit and do the micro adjustments. So that would also be a staffing problem, that you need to find people that would be able to do that and then acquire them and have them work for the company. But it is definitely a thing that we would like to work towards, because I'm in the belief that doing as much as possible with people as close to you as possible is the best way forward.
And obviously increasing the quality of the movement, especially if it's something proprietary made for Arcanaut that's going to be exclusive to the brand, is going to push the price point up. Now, currently, we operate just below $4,000 excluding tax, just $3,950 for the Dark Matter, for the upcoming Havander, the upcoming Clint, and all the Fordite models that we have currently available, although there will be a new Fordite model coming out soon. And that means that we're going to be jumping to a new price point. Do you think that once that price point is established and people have become comfortable with Arcanaut at that brand, we will look to increase even further with the production maybe of a Scandinavian caliber? Or do you think we're going to try and hold it around the new level, which will be, not 5 figures, but closer to?
It depends. Again, it's a question of the economies of scale. Because if we sold 5,000 pieces and we could make 5,000 movements, then it's a lot easier to do things here in Scandinavia, because you can design, manufacture, and do 5,000 movements, but we don't want to go up to those numbers in terms of making watches. So it is kind of a difficult thing to figure out where you want to be there.
Can you talk us through some numbers involved in those kind of calculations? Like when because you've mentioned that the price breaks of increased volumes are drastic. Like having one piece made, let's just say for the sake of argument, is like €1,000. Having 2 pieces made is like €800 a pop. And then by the time you get to 100 pieces, you can get them for almost 15 or 20 or $25. And you're looking at this balance of like quantities and cost. What's the sweet spot? Is there a sweet spot? Is there one break that makes more sense than others?
Yeah, there is. Like you can actually see like a curve from, going from very small numbers and then up to, for example, 200 units. And then it kind of tapers off a bit.
Okay.
But then what you need to remember is then when you go up to 1,000 pieces, you might save 2% only from 200 pieces to 1,000 pieces, but that's a lot of money.
Yeah, at that point,
that's a lot of cash out.
That's a lot of cash if you actually sell 1,000 pieces. So there is like a point where it tapers off, and it's different from process to process, like from what you need to manufacture and from the process to process. So in some cases it's at 1,000. At some cases it's at 5,000. Some things it's at 10.
yeah, no, I understand. So to give like listeners or viewers an idea of sort of components that could fit into those categories, for example, a solid silver case could be 10 pieces because they're mostly handmade or hand finished. Gaskets could be 5,000 pieces. For example, crown tubes might be 100. So those are the kind of things that we're talking about there. Could you talk us through not just the process, but also like some things you've learned about the concept to realization phase. So when you have an idea, what's the first thing you do? What feasibility test do you put it through? Who do you contact first to see if it was going to work? And then take us through the steps to bring it to life.
Well, it's different from case to case, because in some cases I have an idea, I go to James and say, okay, could we do this for a dial? And then
And I give the big thumbs down
then or
and
then,
stomp my feet.
and then I get back to you in 2 months, and then you have done it, and we've tried that. Or it's that James comes up with a new material, and then we need to fit that into an actual model and figure out when to launch it. I think
That's the advantage of us being such a small company, is we are this adaptable. I don't think much larger brands, of course, wouldn't be able to say, okay, here's this new material we figured out. What can we do with it? Let's build a watch around it. So you're starting from the inside of the watch and designing outwards, as compared to, here's a hole in the market that we can maybe increase our presence by 7.5%. What can we fit in there? We can kind of come at it from either direction. So it's almost an argument for not getting too big and getting too kind of corporate heavy,
and I would say
being piratey.
Yeah, exactly. And being piratey is very non-linear.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
but I think most products, and I know this from also working at big corporates and actually launching products, it is that most products, the process is non-linear. It's that big corporates want to have like a very linear process where you go from idea, then you go to
that just
testing,
makes me itch.
then you go out and launch the product, and then it fails, because you didn't do the diligence right, or you didn't go back one step in the process, because it's like, okay, this idea won't work actually in the
But that's
market.
something that we should be really, really proud of, is we, amongst the three of us, can have these eureka moments. And that's a real rare thing. Like for me, I can't go too much into the project because we haven't announced it yet, but I recall inviting the two of you to join me in the bathroom in Stockholm and turning the lights off and closing the door and showing an idea that I had. And
Yeah, we all said no.
I'm digging a hole here for myself, but that was one of those real, oh God, what can we do with this?
Yeah.
And now it's something that we're running with full speed and see in the future and stuff. But what an absolute gift it was to be able to show this to you guys and say, what about this? Yeah. Whereas if it was a linear process and it has to fit into production schedules and production budgets and stuff, I would be fired from that company in about half an hour. I'm amazed I've stayed here as long as I have not been
Well, talking about your work ethic, interesting conversation. We had a question.
My dad's going to hear this
from Time.Texas again. Another very good question, which says, if you're not working on an Arcanaut project, because although you're a co-owner of a brand, you also have your own clients and you have other projects on the go pretty much all the time. In fact, recently, quite famously, you worked with Ortlans.
Yes.
On a very nice piece, which was revealed in 2 pieces, which was first revealed last year at Watches and Wonders, I think. Is that right? So what do you do with the time that is not spent directly creating the models we've already released? So obviously we know that you spend a lot of time making 4-dite dials for us and experimenting with that material in dark matter and Clint and Havender, but what else are you up to?
A lot of it is spent forcing myself back into an area of general discomfort. As soon as 4-dite, which is something I work with 5 days a week, every day, as soon as it starts to feel a bit familiar, okay, I get this, I know what this stuff
Do you
does.
have the same problem with the marital bed, or is that still an area of discomfort?
No, it's all just a mystery.
How does this work? I don't know either. No idea.
Thanks, buddy.
She told me that in confidence.
Sorry. Okay, Rob's fired. Finding the new hotness, finding the new thing that I can invite you into the men's room in Stockholm and show you, I think is what really gets me out of bed in the morning. Where it gets to be,
Gets us into bed in the evening.
Take two. Where it gets to be difficult is where I kind of made my place in the industry was kind of doing this for several different brands at the same time and trying to keep a bit of unique lineage to each project.
Okay.
Because you don't want to release 3 things at the same time and go, oh God, these all look the same. Like, oh, this guy's like peddling snake oil. But because this is the first time I've had an actual proper home at Arcanaut, where you used to work, I think it actually becomes more difficult to do these external projects because people don't pay me to sketch. People don't pay me to engineer movements.
Thank God.
People want the weirdness. People want the who the hell's idea was this? And I think a lot of the issue that I had a while ago was people say, let's have a coffee at Basel. We would love to do a watch together. Let's talk about something that's going to blow people's minds. So I come in and I give them, in 2 hours, we've got 8 new concepts that can all just be amazing. They go, okay, we'll get back to you. Okay. And then like 2 years later, F all has happened. Mm-hmm. And now I'm thinking, God, that idea that I talked about with that guy, that would be perfect we can do something with Arcanaut. And there can sometimes be a little conflict. And I've had little bitchy messages where someone says, yeah, you talked about that idea with us 4 years ago. And I'm like, yeah. Did I invoice you? Did you hire me? No, it's my effing idea. And it does create a bit of a gray area and a bit of a weird tension. So
have you had that conflict with people in the past where there's been a disagreement of whose idea it was and you've used something that someone else said was theirs?
Yeah. And I don't like it at all. Because what that does is it kind of forces me to put a lid on it sometimes. And I think I need to be a bit like the Robin Williams, high on whatever kind of narcotics of this industry, jumping around going crazy and just sort of spouting weirdness, because it ends up in things like we're seeing at Arcanaut. I think if I sit down and you send me an NDA and I have my lawyers look it over and we shake hands and we agree to be bonkers crazy for 11% of the time, I'm just not going to be happy. And you're not going to get any happiness and joy out of the work. So I think there needs to be a bit of, I don't know if lineage is the right word, but I need to be able to be a little schizophrenic. Almost. I need to be able to be somewhat sensible for this brand and 8 shades of crazy for this other brand.
Do you think you're a good businessman?
Fuck no.
How has that?
Look where I'm sitting.
How has that affected your navigation through the industry? Because I mean, let's face it, for someone that's admittedly not a great businessman, you've certainly done a lot of good business in the last few years. But I suppose you may have left a bit of money on the table in the process. But how does that affect you? And why are you not good? What's the problem?
Honestly?
Yeah, honestly.
This is going to sound really self-serving and trying to be overly cool, but I just don't care.
Really?
I just don't give a fuck about money. And that is the stupidest thing you could say.
But you do care about reputation, right?
Well, that's my currency.
Yeah. Oh. And so that's why
if it's a watch that's $50, or I kid you, I'm working on a one-off piece for a common friend of ours that's going to be about probably about close to $500,000. It's cool. It's a funky watch, but doesn't make me any cooler. I get more excited about somebody saying, "What can you do for $100?" That's cool. That's fun, and that's piratey. Me flexing on somebody else's money is like me bragging about a car that my mom bought. I didn't buy it. It's not mine. It's not my money.
Back seat. Nailed it. Nailed it.
Hang on, I'll give you props. Props for that one. Mom says hi.
I love Mrs. Thompson.
Yeah, it's a conversation that I can go around and around on for hours, so feel free to cut me off. But that's the nature of this early stage creative ideation. It's such a dynamic thing, and we need to be throwing ideas back and forth around the table, around the pub, whatever it is, because we're all in the same family. But if it's like the Baselworld type thing and it's 5 different people from 5 different companies, and suddenly someone goes, "That's a great idea, I'm going to do that." And the person from the other company goes, "Well, actually, hang on there, Chief. That was my idea." That's just a nightmare scenario for me. I absolutely.
But isn't it also going back to the thing that we have talked about before, that you don't really get credit for ideas, you get credit for execution.
Yes.
You can't just sit on an idea and then be like, well, that's my idea, because a lot of the times ideas also comes out of, as you say, an interaction.
Yeah.
And if you don't act on that idea, then it's like saying, hey, I like that girl, and then another guy, you don't move on her, you don't do anything, and then
she was mine.
Then in 10 years, it's like, well, hey, dude, I called dibs 10 years ago, but did you
You know,
talk
and it was
to
like
her?
it was like we were talking about these sort of grumpy jackass comments that are always sort of showing up on blogs, one blog more than others, and it's always the equivalent of absolute tosh. You have to explain to me what tosh is later. This is absolute tosh. I could have done something like that for $200, but you
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah.
And you
And if you did,
Tell us how.
you'd be the boss of Arcanaut.
yeah.
Happily, if you could make these watches for $200, we would be driving Lamborghinis and
Yeah.
drinking stuff out of coconuts right now.
That is really hard to
Instead
read
of beating the
sometimes.
crap out of ourselves day in, day out.
You know,
on a
I read a
personal,
comment the
professional
other day
level.
that was like, "Oh, this would be a great watch at $500," and I'm like, "A Bugatti Veyron would be a great car at $1,500."
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It doesn't cost that to make it, unfortunately, Sunshine. So, you jog on. You know, it's difficult because I know that we've had like situations where we've all done it. We've got involved when we knew before we hit send we should never have got involved.
I've got some kind of terrier DNA, and I have to just.
But you know, when someone writes a comment like that, you're like, oh my goodness, this is the Dunning-Kruger effect in full swing. This person does not know what an idiot they've made themselves look like.
If they say that is ugly as hell, these guys are idiots. That's okay.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's going
It's
back
also-
to this. You don't want to make things middle of the road. What pisses me off is when someone says that's absolute crap. That doesn't cost more than $200 to make that watch. I know for a fact.
Yeah, one of the great.
If we could do this for $200, we would be.
not to be
It's our job to sell more watches, right? We would sell more at $200 than we would at $4,000.
not to dwell on the negative side of things, obviously.
No,
but
totally, do it, do it,
as
do
a
it, do it.
well as a point. It's like not only do these things cost more materially, one of the most overlooked commodities in the luxury industry is time.
Yeah.
Ironically, that's what,
Ironically.
it's what we're selling. But like your time, and it's not just the time that you spend hunched over a wheel, cutting your fingers off while you're making a 4-dial dial. It's not just the time you spent designing that dial. It's all the time that you spent before that
Yeah.
training at art college, and the money you spent emigrating to Sweden, living your life, like having the experiences that enabled you to have the ideas that have eventually gone into the products that you create. Like it's a whole.
I have a
process.
master's degree in industrial design, and I don't know where it is. It's in a cookbook in my kitchen somewhere. It might be under there somewhere.
Under this coffee
Under your
cup here.
coffee cup. It's the reason why I could make a 4-dial dial in an hour is because I've made crap loads of them, and I've screwed up many. I've learned what the material can do and can't do. And it's the same reason that I can take the exact same ingredients as, say, someone like Gordon Ramsay would have, and we're not going to get the same results. You know, you could put me on a bicycle next to Greg LeMond, and you're going to get two very drastically different results. The bike might be the same. And that's something that I've really had to kind of take punches on because I'm not working with a commodity as far as gold or precious stones. You can check the prices of gold, of platinum, of whatever. You can't check the price of paint, waste paint,
But I think it's
fucking seashells. I mean,
but
good God.
I think it's a thing of actually people also looking, and it's probably a thing that comes from the post-Kickstarter area, because then a lot of people got into basically this open world of watchmaking where, things are sold very cheaply, made in China, and that's not a problem in itself. But I think a lot of the people that came on board has this mentality of, okay, I know what things cost. And the things that they look at is only one little part of the watch. They look at what's the movement, what's the material made out of. If it's gold and it's a great movement, then it's easy to see where the costs went. But, that's not the entire thing of the watch, of making a watch. It's like saying, it's like when you're getting into cars and you're just saying, well, how much is the horsepower on the car? And that's the only thing you care about, like, or how fast can it go from
Because it's
1 to
empirical
100?
data. It's a number.
Exactly.
My number is bigger than your number. Believe me when I say this.
Exactly, but like,
Thank you for staying on that one. Sorry.
but it's like there is things that you can. For a lot of people, it is just looking at the spreadsheet, basically.
Yeah.
Like they think they can look at the spreadsheet and then say, the movement costs this, the assembly costs this, and the materials cost this, so it must cost $500 US.
Yeah.
But then they're missing, 20
Margin.
parts and margins, because like, why would you even, let's say we actually we could make a watch for $500. Well, but we didn't make anything. We were making $10 a piece.
Well, that's because you and all the other watch brands exist to serve the customers that want to pay the lowest possible price, not to make a living. Forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's
But
a charity, it's a service.
Hearts and minds, right?
But also, wouldn't you want to buy a watch from a company that actually makes sound business decisions, where it's like they don't do, razor sharp margins, so that they actually exist in 10 years.
Yeah.
Because like a major problem for new brands is that they take, as you said in the beginning, which also is probably a thing that we are doing, we take we're priced too low.
Too low margin.
Yeah. And that's a problem, because one, you can't get into retailers, you can't get the right partners. Secondly, you don't have the money to invest into new models. You don't have money to invest into actually scaling.
It's not a sustainable business model
No.
to have 0.5% margin. You do that if you're just going to make a small group of watches to sell them to your 20-year buddies. That's great.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a fun project. I would like that. But that's not a business. That's nothing close to a business. And this mentality of, somebody stomping around an art gallery saying, "What? That cost $1 million. I could do that for $75." You fucking didn't, though. One of my good friends, I gave him such a hard time about this, but he was like, "Have you ever heard of this luxury brand called Roland Eaton?" And they do like belts, but the belt buckles are like the most unbelievably jewels, very unbelievably micro-engineered, and they're like literally $100,000 for a belt buckle. They're like the of belt buckles, like the same kind of look. And this friend of mine's like, "Oh, no, I'm a second-year engineering student. I know how this shit goes together. I'm going to go to Bauhaus and get like $8 worth of brass and copper sheets. I'm going to make one of these. Can I make it in your studio, James? Oh, it's just a spring. I know how this works." And I just got so effed off by this whole thing, because it's like, you look at this thing, this is literally more complex than like a atmospheric re-entry vehicle. It's like, fuck, no, it's like, this is a little corner here and does this, and I'm going to make a $100,000 belt buckle in your studio using $10 worth of copper piping or something.
Yeah, of course.
And of course it didn't work. Mm-hmm. And it's with this whole conversation, I don't get why this watch costs that much. No, it's just got one of these that does that. But that attitude for me is very much what I took from the Kickstarter, post-Kickstarter movement, which was manufacture was taken away from anonymous factories that you never had access to, and now you can sort of talk to the makers. I was a maker before I was in the watches, and you sort of talk to a few people in the know, like our great friend Jens Ansa, who is a designer and a maker and a good businessman as well. And you talk to people that know how things go together and know how they get manufactured, and you kind of get this arrogance of, "Oh, no, I know a guy. No, I can make that $100,000 belt buckle for $6. No, $6. And of course it doesn't work, and you waste a couple Saturdays and you make yourself look like a fool. And it's I'm hoping that's an era that's grinding to a halt.
Yeah.
Because
maybe
it's just tedious, man. I can't handle those guys anymore.
Talking of thinking you can do things that other people do, not you personally, but one in general.
Is this when I sing?
Could be. We could do a small intermezzo when you break down in song.
To the moon.
Some of our followers have asked a question which I once asked you, tongue-in-cheek, I might add, but your response was not tongue-in-cheek, to say the least. You were very hard-lined on this, but I'm going to read it out so that the viewers and listeners can hear it themselves.
He actually looks nervous.
The question is, your emphasis is on a daily casual sports watch, but do you see opportunities to move into more defined watch categories, such as diver, pilot, field watch, chronograph, etc., or do you like being in your own general undefined category?
The last one.
God, glad you said that. Otherwise, I would have been out the door, buddy.
Yeah, so, I mean, we won't labor this too hard because, I mean, I think we're all aligned on this. Like Arcanaut is something completely different. And although at the moment there's a single case, a platform that has had a lot of different dials put through it and has a few more yet to come, there will be new cases and new platforms, shall we say, in the future that will allow you to stretch your creativity without the need to do a 300-meter helium release valve diver. But what is it?
Oh, and if the bezel was red on one part and blue on the other?
No way,
Total,
man. Amazing.
Keep it under your hat.
Just share with us exactly where your adamance comes from there.
I would say I would do functional watches, but I don't dive, so I don't want to do a diver. But I would do, let's say, a sports watch that's centered around boxing, for example, because that's actually something I do and have a passion for. And I would know, okay, I could do some functionality around this that could be interesting, but I don't want to do a diver because I'm not a diver and I don't know anything
That's
about
interesting
diving.
as hell.
Mm-hmm. What about you? If you could make like a watch around one of your hobbies, would it just be a beer counter?
Just a watch that says time to go home.
Always. Just always.
So depressing. I was actually just thinking as you guys were having that last little exchange there that would we do a field watch? Would we do a dive watch? I think no. We make Arcanauts. Our lack of identity is our identity, and that is really, really critical to maintain. The moment that we start saying, "Here's our pilot chronograph because I really like Bell and Ross. Here's our dive watch because somebody really likes Seamaster or whatever," at that point, you're watering down your own DNA.
Yep.
And you're fucking selling out.
Okay. Well,
And
on that
maybe
note,
an overstatement, but that's what I get paid the big bucks for.
on that note, we're gonna wrap up this session with one final question, and that is, how many designs or products are in the works at any one time, and are you planning years ahead in advance? If so, what can you share with us?
Oh man. Well,
man.
Step into the bathroom with me and turn the lights off.
Don't do it.
The answer is
step into
yes.
my web.
And the answer is actually we have so many projects that it's hard to choose which ones to release when.
Yep.
Because, and that's, you know, a whole thing about release strategy, which I'm very thankful that we have you on board, because you can't release everything at once. You can't release everything, you know, at the same time, because then you would be like, why, you know, you're eating away your own bandwidth.
Well, it's like a band putting out 3 albums in the same year.
Yeah.
You're like, guys, slow down. This is just stupid.
But I would say we have plans for this year. We have plans for 4 additional models. So we have some in 4 or 5 additional models. And we
Still
have,
to come.
And maybe I would say we have the Havenda and Clint, which we have revealed. Then we have 2 more experimental pieces, which are going to be super interesting to reveal, because it plays around with, you know, the idea of the brand, and it plays around with some very cool things. And then do we have plans for many years to come? Yes, but not in terms of each individual model, but in terms of platform. Like, because we call Dark 2 the platform, and then we have a lot of models in that category, but then we have plans for separate platforms that we can play with, which is, you know...
So different sizes, different case shapes, different case styles.
Yeah, exactly. And we have several of those that are planned out for the next many years, but the reason why it's in the future is because we need to take some steps in different directions before we can do those pieces. So before we can live that vision, we have to take the prior steps before that. So, yeah.
And we love working in a non-linear fashion. Well, to be honest, love it or hate it, one of us in this group works in a very hyper non-linear fashion.
Yeah.
So if we know what we're doing for the next 3 years, I'll see you later. I'll be in Maui or something.
Yeah.
Like
we don't tell you. That's what we know. We know what you're doing for the next 3 years.
why is there nobody else in this chat group?
But I would also say, like Mike Tyson usually says, everybody's got a plan until you get hit in the head.
That is, I think, the perfect quote upon which to end this episode. Thank you for watching or listening to this podcast filmed on location in the Badger Den in Gothenburg with Anders Brandt, James Thompson, and me, Rob Nuds. Thanks a lot for your time. We'll see you next time.
Stay fresh, cheese bag.
It's absolutely great.